In 1971, a psychologist turned a university basement into a fake prison. 9 days later, he had to shut it down because the guards he hired had started torturing the prisoners for real. For 50 years, this has been taught as proof that ordinary people will turn evil if you hand them power. Almost none of that story is true, the way it was sold to you. This is the Stanford Prison Experiment, and the real footage tells a very different story than the one in your psychology textbook. In August 1971, Stanford psychologist Philip Zimbardo recruited 24 male college students, screened for stability, no criminal history, no psychological issues. He randomly split them into guards and prisoners, built a mock prison in the basement of the psychology building, and planned to run the study for 2 full weeks. He wanted to know whether the brutal behavior seen in real prisons came from bad people or from the situation itself. The official story says the guards descended into cruelty almost immediately, and the experiment had to be stopped after 6 days because it had spiraled completely out of control. That much is true. What got left out for decades is how it actually spiraled. Zimbardo wasn't a neutral observer. He was the prison superintendent. He didn't just watch the experiment, he ran it. And he gave the guards direct instructions before it even started, in audio recordings that surfaced decades later. Zimbardo can be heard telling the guard staff to create fear, to make prisoners feel powerless, to strip them of individuality. This wasn't a spontaneous descent into cruelty that emerged on its own. The cruelty was, in part, requested by the man running the study. Then there's the most famous scene in the entire experiment. A prisoner having what looked like a psychotic breakdown, screaming that he was burning up inside. For decades, this was presented as raw, unscripted proof of the study's power. In 2019, that same prisoner, going by the name Douglas Korpi, gave an interview stating plainly that he faked it. He said he was trying to leave the study to study for a graduate exam, and that when Zimbardo's team wouldn't let him quit, acting like he was falling apart was the only way out he could find. He described his performance in the recordings as, in his words, the easiest acting job of his life. And the guards weren't just a random sample of ordinary people either. The recruitment ad Zimbardo ran asked for volunteers for a study of prison life, and later analysis found that people who responded to that specific wording scored measurably higher on traits linked to aggression than people who responded to a neutrally worded ad. The study may not have shown what happens to random people handed power. It may have shown what happens when you specifically recruit for the kind of person drawn to a prison study, then tell them to be cruel. None of this means the experiment revealed nothing. Some of what happened inside that basement was real, unscripted, and genuinely troubling. Guards who weren't given explicit instructions still escalated on their own initiative. Prisoners who knew intellectually it was fake still described real panic and real distress. Something about the situation clearly mattered, but something happened. And this proves ordinary people will always turn evil under a uniform are very different claims. And only the second one made it into decades of textbooks, TED Talks, and true crime documentaries. By the time French and Australian researchers ran a BBC-funded replication in 2001 called the BBC Prison Study, they found something almost nobody expected. The guards, given no instructions to be cruel, mostly refused to embrace their role at all. It was the prisoners who eventually organized and pushed for a more equal system. The result was the opposite of Zimbardo's, And it barely made headlines because it didn't confirm the story people already believed. The real lesson of Stanford was never really about the fragility of ordinary people. It was about how easily a compelling story survives, even after the evidence underneath it stops holding up, as long as nobody has a reason to go back and check.